I never imagined that a young man's gaze could keep me awake at my age. It may sound absurd, but I spent about 10 minutes that morning examining the elderly face that reflected back at me in the bathroom mirror. It was because I no longer recognized the woman, not because I felt unattractive. I'm Maggie Walker, a 67-year-old resident of Denver's southern suburbs. Over 10 years have passed since my divorce. Frank, my husband, left me for a lady who was over 30 years younger. I initially had trouble living alone, but eventually I figured it out. I ate breakfast by myself, watched the news by myself, and slept with my cat Oliver by my pillow. Every now and then, my daughter, who resides in Florida, sends me photos of her grandchildren along with the message, "I'll give you a call this weekend." Weekends frequently pass without a call. Ethan, the son of my only son, who's currently attending college in Boston, is the only grandchild to whom I truly feel a strong bond. Sometimes Ethan would text, "Grandma, I miss your apple pie." And other times, he would send a picture of a new meal. My heart warmed each time I read it. And this time, he announced that he would be spending a few days with Grandma. "I'll be back on Thursday, Grandma. I have a ticket reserved." From that day on, I cleaned the windows, bought Ethan's favorite scented candles, cinnamon and vanilla, and scrubbed the glassware I hadn't used since last Christmas. I even prepared an old casserole recipe that Ethan had loved since he was a child, but Frank detested. Around noon, the doorbell rang, so I hurried to the mirror, straightened my sweater, and pushed my hair out of the way. Grinning, I opened the door. Ethan was tall, unkempt, and toting a bulky rucksack, and there was another beside him, tall and slim with dark hair pulled back in a bun, dark skin, and a somber stare that seemed almost out of place. He stood slightly off to the side. Grandma Ethan spoke in a somewhat bashful tone. "I brought my roommate, Jordan. There is nowhere for him to go this summer. I hope it's okay with you." Jordan gave a small smile, but it was a protective one, the kind of smile that comes from someone who has been rejected a lot. I was going to inquire as to why I hadn't informed you. I was going to admit that I wasn't ready. Rather, I found myself responding, "Of course you two come in," and moving aside. It was his own home, and Ethan entered as though it were. Jordan's footsteps brushed the wood floor so softly that I was oblivious to them. I watched him with curiosity rather than condemnation. I didn't typically see college students like Jordan. He was reserved, courteous, and mature for his age. Something in his eyes was broken. As we took our seats at the table, Ethan mentioned that he prefers to be quiet. "You'll like him, though." I'm not as good at making salads as Jordan. I was attempting to jest when I said, "It's not that hard. Remember when you fed me salad with mayonnaise?" Jordan laughed. His laugh was brief and low, as though he didn't want to break the silence in the house. I presented the food as though I were hosting a distinguished visitor. I gave Jordan a mouthful of stew, and he nodded his gratitude. As he accepted the platter, his hand touched mine. Even though it was only a brief contact, my entire body momentarily stopped. And what most perplexed me, the touch wasn't it. It was his subsequent gaze on me. Not a 20-something boy's gaze on his friend's roommate. It was a direct gaze into my eyes. A glance that gave me the impression that I was being watched. The me that had been quietly concealed inside the cardigan, not the silver hair or the wrinkled skin. the need to exist, the vulnerability and the loneliness. I stayed up that night. In the former room, Ethan slept peacefully. I could hear Jordan's slippers rustling on the floor in the middle of the night when he was in the living room. I was afraid to leave. I lay there in the dark with my eyes wide open, wondering why I was feeling restless. As usual, I woke up early the following morning. The sunshine gradually spread across the wooden kitchen table as it came in through the drapes. I put on the low radio and made coffee. Every morning, the voice of an old acquaintance would come in. When I heard very faint footsteps, I removed the bread from the oven. Jordan then showed up at the kitchen door. His hair was still damp and wrapped loosely at the back of his neck, and he was dressed in a white t-shirt. He had a little book in his hand. Jordan smiled when we looked at one other, a soft, a little ashamed smile, as though he understood that he shouldn't be the first person to wake up in someone else's home. I'm accustomed to rising early, right? Jordan just woke up, so his voice was a little gruff. I said as I poured myself another cup of coffee. In the morning, this house needs a conversation partner. Oliver merely meows. He chuckled. I shoved the coffee cup in his direction. No cream, no sugar, just black coffee. All right? He answered somewhat, taken aback. It's my favorite. I chuckled and remarked that not many people under 30 drink black coffee. Perhaps because he didn't need to be so alert. My ex-boyfriend, Frank, used to refer to it as morning poison. Taking a sip, Jordan said. I stopped. I was drawn to the brief, yet meaningful comment. He was not merely courteous. He paid attention to the underlying mood, as well as what people were saying. For a while, we sat in silence. We didn't say much, but we didn't have to. Around midday, Ethan awoke. He had the same drowsy voice, half-lidded eyes, and disheveled hair that he had had as a newborn. He gave me a back hug after whining at the scent of bacon. You're still the best cook, he remarked, giving me a puppy dog hug on the shoulder. As I chuckled, I noticed Jordan observing the spectacle with a faint smile on his face. Missing yet neither aloof or envious. My heart began to ache a little. The remainder of the day went by in an odd, reassuring cadence. Jordan was given a tour of the neighborhood by Ethan, who showed him the Aunt Ruth's house, which was a little chatty, the century-old oak tree where the children used to play hide-and-seek, and the garden corner, where Frank used to plant jalapenos, despite the fact that none of the family members could handle spicy cuisine. I heard them both laughing in the backyard in the afternoon. With iced tea in hand, I stepped out onto the porch to find Ethan clutching a patch of grass, as though he had just resisted it, and Jordan driving the lawnmower. Both of them were sweating profusely and laughing like kids. They both turned back and laughed even harder when I said, "You guys look like you're in an energy drink commercial." "We're considering launching a gardening YouTube channel," Ethan stated. I squinted and inquired what the channel's name was. "Mowing with Strangers," Jordan remarked, setting down the mower and turning to face me. I chuckled, and I felt as though I had been transported back in time by 20 years to a time when this yard was brimming with laughter, sunshine, and vitality. After a straightforward but comfortable supper that night, we settled in to watch Sleepless in Seattle, an old film. Halfway through, Ethan dozed off on my shoulder. Jordan's hand silently pulled the blanket over Ethan's legs, while he remained sitting up straight and kept his eyes fixed on the TV. A tiny, delicate, unassuming motion occurred while I viewed the scene, and an odd sensation sprang in my heart. Just a want to be near someone, not love or lust. Jordan was still sitting there when I got up to turn off the lights after the movie. "It's an old film, but it's still good," he added quietly. I answered, "Some things don't have to be new to touch people." Jordan gave me a brief glance, but within that moment, I sensed a shift in my chest. This time I didn't turn around and went directly to my room. I woke up the following morning with an odd feeling. Excited, yet not worn out or nervous. I combed my hair, applied lipstick, and put on a soft green frock that seemed too light for my age. No one else was the reason I did it. For myself, I did it. I desired to experience living. Jordan was reading at the table when I entered the kitchen. For a brief moment, he looked up in surprise. However, I did see it. "You appear so springy," he said. My heart was racing when I laughed. "Regards. Spring has been a long time ago." I asked the two of us to go to the neighborhood farmers market on the third day. Jordan and I drove downtown after Ethan slackly declined. We discussed music, movies, and books. There was no awkward silence. "Do you like this scent?" Jordan inquired, pointing to a bouquet of lavender. "Scents that bring up memories of things I've forgotten to say," appealed to me. "I understand," he murmured, nodding at me. And in some way, I knew he did. Jordan approached me that afternoon when I was watering the plants and gave me a little picture frame. "This was discovered in the garage. I wonder if you own it." I examined it. It was a photo of me and Ethan during a picnic when he was 5 years old. I was unable to recall when I had lost it. I tried to speak evenly while holding the frame. "Regards." "I thought I'd lost that piece of the puzzle." Jordan simply turned aside after nodding. However, I was unable to look away from his back at that very time. 3 days, 3 mornings, a few brief words, 3 glances. I didn't want to and couldn't describe this emotion. However, I was certain of one thing. Jordan's presence was reawakening aspects of me that I had assumed were dead in a house where it had been just the cats and me for so long. The wind was blowing on the 4th day. The early autumn breeze is cool enough to make one feel cold, but not cold enough to require a jacket. I heard the back door open a little as I stood in the kitchen, organizing the freshly purchased vegetables in an old bamboo basket. Jordan entered, carrying a handful of dirt-covered carrots. Everything slowed a bit when he saw the light coming in through the window behind him. He held out the carrots like a remorseful schoolboy and said, "I forgot to wash these." His nails were neat and his hands were tanned, but they were a little ragged from working at jobs other than typing. I thanked him, accepted them, and disposed of the carrots in the sink. Jordan remained standing, leaning softly against the edge of the table, as I rolled up my sleeves, observing the kitchen, the glass spice jars, the lace tablecloth, and the antique wall clock. He remarked, "You seem to like doing things the old-fashioned way." I smiled and added, "Old doesn't mean outdated." Simply said, I've trusted these things because I've lived with them long enough. Jordan gave a nod, not a courteous one, but one of sincere agreement. Like I believed Frank Mayax was the one thing I could trust with my life. I felt compelled to say more, as if something inside of me needed to be opened. After I said it, I felt bad about it. I should have kept my information to myself. Jordan simply whispered, "Does it hurt when the thing you trust the most is the thing that hurts you the most, without asking or prying. I gave him a look. Not seeing a young man for the first time, I witnessed an elderly person who had lost faith and been abandoned. I can't even trust myself because it hurts so badly. My response was hardly audible above a whisper. Quiet. However, the silence wasn't awkward. It was the stillness of two individuals facing a mirror, each of whom saw a reflection of themselves. Ethan asked his friends to join him at the sports bar that night for a beer. I didn't prohibit it. I was aware that he craved solitude. Jordan was reading on the back porch when he departed. After making 2 cups of hot chocolate, I went outside and set one next to him. Not coffee? Jordan asked with a little smile. Coffee is a morning beverage. I sat down on the chair beside him and remarked, I need something lighter tonight. We sat in silence. Our shirts were gently brushed by the wind. The air was heavy with the aroma of lavender from the flower beds. Suddenly Jordan said, I miss my mum. I didn't respond. I simply listened. She had a bottle of this perfume once. I can still clearly recall it. The night she departed was the last time I smelled it. My heart tightened. Instead of staring at me, he continued to gaze out into the garden. My father remained silent. The following morning, breakfast was served as if nothing had occurred. That was the end of it. I placed my hand on the chair's armrest, just close enough to sense the distance, but not touching. I've discovered that I should not ask anyone anything. However, I do get fatigued sometimes. His tone faltered. I looked over at him. The golden light bounced off his cheeks, tilting his face. His eyes were moist, almost like tears, but not quite. I wanted to touch his hand or shoulder, but I refrained. I merely muttered, Jordan, no one should live without hope of a return. He turned to face me. Once more that glance made me shudder. Not with his youthful age. It was because I hadn't been looked at that way in such a long time. All night long, I lay awake. My body refused to remain motionless. There was nobody there, so my hand longed to call or text someone. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea after going to the kitchen. Jordan had left an old leather notebook on the table. I put it aside with no intention of reading it. However, a piece of paper dropped out. Written by hand, the ink slightly smeared. I questioned whether anyone would ever wait for me at the door. I understood, so I sat down with trembling palms and tears in my eyes. 30 years ago, following a disagreement with Frank, I had written the exact identical thing in my diary. Does anyone actually want me to return home, I had also wondered. Or do I simply arrive to cook and do the cleaning before vanishing behind the door? I closed the journal and carefully replaced the paper. I remained silent. However, a door had suddenly opened inside, opening not only to Jordan, but also to a part of myself that I had long since buried. It was light precipitation on the 5th day. The house was strangely silent, as though the dampness outside had muffled all the sounds. Ethan had left since the morning, stating that he might return late because he was meeting up with some old pals. I asked only a few questions. I was aware that he required room. Furthermore, I no longer had the authority to make excessive requests. All morning, Jordan had remained in his room with the door open and jazz music softly playing. I stopped for a second as I passed. He had a notebook next to him, a warm cup of coffee, and his laptop on a low table while he sat on the floor. Jordan glanced up at me with his gaze. I asked you in a whisper, are you working on it? Yes, a paper about Baldwin's corruption. I gave a nod. He writes honestly. Jordan responded, "And blood," with a gentle smile. I didn't respond. I simply experienced a surge of admiration within myself. Young folks don't say stuff like that very often. I prepared garlic bread and stew that evening. Jordan assisted with the table clearing. He was standing too near. When I turned to get a drink, my hand touched his. A brief contact. However, my heart skipped a beat. Jordan winced and then grinned. I pretended nothing had occurred, but as soon as I looked away, my cheeks began to flush. It continued to rain after supper. Ethan texted a friend to let them know he was spending the night there. After saying goodnight, I sat on the couch with an old book that I was unable to read. My gaze strayed to the glass, where the raindrops formed sluggish lines resembling recollections. Jordan came out of the room with 2 hot tea mugs. He said, "I think Grandma needs this." I took them with a smile. When I allowed him to call me, that I'm not sure. We sat and watched an old film. I'm feeling romantic. Not many young folks enjoy that. Jordan, however, silently observed each frame as though he were experiencing it himself. No one stopped, only a silent stare, until the film got to the scene where the 2 major characters were passing each other in the rain. Jordan exhaled softly, and I noticed it. He muttered, "I used to think love was something that needed to be said. However, it's possible that silence might occasionally hurt more than rejection." I was at a loss for words. All I felt was a constriction in my chest. In the distance, there was a tiny clap of thunder. Just out of instinct, I jumped a little and unconsciously leaned forward. Jordan's arm stroked my shoulder. He glanced in my direction, remained motionless. Didn't steer clear of. For about a minute, we sat at that close quarters. His youthful physique was warm to the touch, and I could smell the soap coming from his collar. The teacup was still in my grasp, but my fingers were starting to shake a little. Jordan's head cocked slightly. Without hurrying or pressuring, his gaze seemed to be asking a question. Just a quiet plea. I have no idea why I did that. Longing, loneliness, or simply a moment of vulnerability. I did not, however, relocate. Gently, as though he were frightened of shattering something delicate within me, he placed his hand on mine. I didn't withdraw my hand. That's where I left it. For a long period, we sat in that position. No moving, no talking. It was a silent space with only the sound of the rain, the movie, and the merging of 2 heartbeats. I had something to say. A caution, a rejection, something that distances morality from reason. However, I said, "Are you cold?" Jordan grinned after giving a small shake of his head. A gloomy smile. "No, I sense. Secure." I was the first to get up when the film concluded. I moved away from him and placed the glass on the table. "Jordan, good night." I didn't hold out for a response. I shut the bedroom door, leaned against the wall, and spent a considerable amount of time with my eyes closed. I had no idea what was going on. However, I realized that I had been touched by presence rather than hands for the first time in years. After the rain, the skies cleared the following morning. Long golden streaks appeared on the wooden floor as sunlight filtered through the kitchen window. As though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred the previous evening, the scent of coffee filled the silent room. However, I was aware. Jordan, I was certain, was also aware. We didn't discuss holding hands, sitting close to one another, or looking each other in the eye. Everything had returned to normal to the extent that it was unusual. In the afternoon, Ethan came back with several drinks and some laughing from a school party. Noise filled the house once more, but I felt oddly out of place in that familiar rhythm. It seemed as though my heart's interior had been altered. Although they were no longer in their proper locations, the original items were still present. I brought 2 mugs of chocolate to the back porch while Ethan went out to play hoops with his friends. Jordan was sitting there, looking off into space with a notebook on her knees and a pencil in her hand. There was a pause before I said, "Some things can't be kept in a book, right?" as I took a seat next to him. Jordan grinned. "Have you ever wished to vanish?" he inquired, setting down his pen and turning his cup of cocoa in his fingers. I stopped. The unexpected, unprompted question was like a sharp knife to my brain. "Yes," I replied, glancing toward the maple tree at the garden's end. "A lot of times. Particularly when I discovered that Frank had been seeing someone else 3 years prior when I was 52. Jordan didn't say anything. Unmoving, he listened without passing judgment. I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. I was simply silent. Like I always did, I set the table. Like I always done, I made cookies. As usual, I prepared 2 cups of cocoa that evening and placed one on the kitchen counter. However, nobody drank it. I stopped. Something lodged in my throat, like a word that had not been properly spoken for years, but not because I was feeling anything. I used to believe that things could be simpler if I vanished. I wouldn't have to wait for anyone. I wouldn't have to show my weakness to anyone. Jordan gave a small nod. "However, you did not vanish." I chuckled. "No, because my daughter wanted to know how to mend a burnt roast chicken, so she called in the middle of the night." We both chuckled. Not a long chuckle, but enough to dispel some of the confusion in my heart. I said, "I made the decision to live after that. Who would cut the lavender every morning, bake cookies for Ethan, listen to the radio, and recall the host's 1998 remarks if I didn't live? It's not that I was strong." Jordan cocked his head and stared at me for a while. "Do you consider me to be strong?" abruptly he asked. After a minute of stillness, I answered, "No." "You seem to be the one who made it out alive." Jordan seemed to be stopped by that. Jordan's gaze shifted to his hands. He clutched his fingers together, as though securing something together would prevent it from falling apart. I used to believe that no one would notice if I vanished, as though every syllable had to be breathed through a thin layer of memory. He spoke steadily and carefully. "I spent 3 days sitting by the window after my mother left. Every night I hoped she would return. She might have simply gone to purchase some cake, or became disoriented, or required time." After swallowing, Jordan went on. "However, my father organized her closet on the 4th day. He just stated, 'Put away all that girly stuff,' without saying anything more. Don't cry. I didn't breathe." I had heard my mother say the exact same thing, so it wasn't that his remarks were so shocking. Avoid becoming weak. Don't cry. Women must persevere. I became self-sufficient. Jordan lowered his voice. "I spent the entire year in the dorms, was employed at the library, did not attend any parties, didn't spend time with anybody, didn't send home a text. Have you ever had the feeling that you're fading?" I asked quietly. He gently nodded as he turned to face me. "Fading in large groups, in mirrors, fading." There were moments when I believed I wasn't the person in the mirror. I froze at that. I had experienced the same thing, losing my sense of self, and feeling like a supporting figure in someone else's life. This time I reached out without hesitation. I delicately touched the back of his hand with mine. But I said softly, "You're still here. I'm still seated. I take it that someone is pouring you cocoa." Jordan chuckled, and this time there was a break in the sound. I felt as though I wasn't for the first time. "Fading," he said. The breeze was as gentle as a hand on the neck. Jordan looked aside, was quiet for a while, then went on, "I'm aware. I'm much younger than you. I'm aware that things are peculiar, but you're the best listener I've ever had." I pulled my hand away and put it to my chest. I had a racing heart. I whispered, "You don't have to explain. No one has ever listened to me without attempting to alter who I am." We exchanged glances. This time there were no restrictions or shyness. Just two eternal souls looking for solace in one another. To realize that we may still be seen, not to hide. No pledges or words were necessary at that moment. It simply was. And I was aware that this moment was genuine, regardless of how this relationship played out, whether it ended amicably or erupted like a wildfire. The late afternoon started to frighten me. Not because it had already grown dark, not because a paper-thin chill started to blow in the early autumn wind. However, it was quiet in the home during those twilight hours, while Ethan was still away, and I found myself wishing Jordan would enter the kitchen to inquire as to what I was doing, to bring the spice container down from the upper shelf for me, or just to stand there with your hands in your pockets and your eyes shamelessly following you as you lean on the table, as though I were the still point in his universe. And I started to require that look. We rewatched Before Sunrise one evening. Ethan went to bed early, so we were left sitting in the dark, with a faint blue light flickering on the screen. Jordan muttered, "I've wanted to have a conversation with someone like that all night," as the movie reached the scene where the two characters were talking about love and death while strolling down the Danube. I said, half joking, "I do." Jordan faced me. "However, most people simply want to spend the entire night talking to someone they don't want to part from." I didn't respond. I had a racing heart. A part of me wanted to ignore it. I wanted to stay part of myself, unsure whether to jump or not. I sat motionless and let the sensation to take over my body as though I were perched on a precipice. Jordan took a step forward. The distance between our shoulders nearly vanished. Not touching, but close enough for me to feel the warmth clinging to the back of my neck. He placed his arm on the back of the chair behind me. Jordan muttered, "Maggie, would you think I was insane if I told you I liked you?" I took a swallow. I wanted to laugh, part of me. Another part of me wants to cry, the one that still hurts when I go to bed by myself. You seem to be lost to me. My voice is as light as air, I say. He might confess. I don't want to leave my current location, though. I feel like the door for the first time. I hold the authority open or closed. I'm not being forced. I'm not being drawn in by anyone. Simply, my hand is on the knob while I stand there. In addition, my heart is a mess. I avoid going to the kitchen the following morning. I spend more time in bed than normal, gazing up at the ceiling, while reflecting on all the times I've nearly messed up and retreated. However, this doesn't seem like an error. It is akin to a desire, something I've long since lost within myself. The clink of glass is the radio, and I hear Jordan downstairs. I listen to the same show every morning, and he's playing it. It brings a smile to my face. He brightened his eyes as though he had been waiting for me to step down. Jordan stated in a casual tone, as though nothing had transpired the previous evening, "I've got coffee for you. Regards." We never spoke again. We didn't come into contact. However, every look and good morning conveyed a tacit understanding that our boundaries were becoming blurred, and neither of us felt certain enough to wish to maintain them. It poured once again that day. I opened an old notepad while sitting in my tiny study by the window. I was perplexed by the blank pages. To save information that no one needed to know, I used to write a few lines every day. However, I was unable to write anything today. I was unable to put these conflicting emotions into words. I paused after writing just one line. Who establishes the boundaries if age is a constraint? I promptly closed the journal. Jordan brought in Kate Chopin's The Awakening, an ancient book I had previously recommended late in the day. While searching through bins of old books in the garage, he had discovered it. He reminded me that she claimed to have read it after her divorce. I picked it up and looked through a couple of the pages. They underlined the lines. Tears stained the ink. It was as if Edna drowned in expectancy, and then in longing. Jordan maintained, however, that she did not die. I glanced up at him. The words are keyed, but simple. I was aware that he was referring to me. And about him, too. I hadn't dabbed perfume behind my ears in a long time, but I did it that night. I wore a lengthy nightgown with a lace collar that was burgundy in color. Softly feminine, but not exposing. I have no idea why I did that. Perhaps it was because I missed being a woman, not just a middle-aged, lonely grandma divorcee woman. When I came out to fetch some water from the kitchen, Jordan was reading in the living room. His eyes froze for a second as he looked up. I was about to look away when he called Maggie quietly. I didn't turn. I just stopped. "Would you mind joining me for a seat?" His voice was as quiet as a breath, for a time as though he was scared to shatter the delicate bond between us. I sat down on the chair beside him after turning around. We didn't talk. We remained stationary. We were simply together, in silence. Jordan carefully extended his hand and touched mine after a time. I didn't pull away this time. I could feel his warm breath on my cheek as he drew in close. "Would you like to—" Without completing his statement, he whispered. I glanced up at him. In his eyes I saw youth. Desire, but also respect for waiting, and most all the absence of ownership. I gave him a quick pat on the cheek. It trembled like the early spring breeze and was as gentle as a petal. "Not tonight," I muttered after that. Jordan pulled his hand away and gave a small nod. Not irate, not coercive. "Thanks for not pushing me away," he said. I put my palm on my heart, where the beats seemed to have risen to a new level, and got up to go to my room. I wondered whether I had gone too far when I shut the door. Or did I just stand on the brink of it? Early this morning I visited the market. The scent of last night's rain was still present in the air, along with the scent of fresh, moist sunshine. I filled a cloth bag with a jar of fresh strawberry jam, some carrots, and a bunch of basil. I heard a familiar voice behind me, just as I was about to turn around. Maggie. For what number of years, Barbara was the one. Her eyes continued to dart like tops, while her hair remained curled like a crow's nest. The sort of person who was up to date on all the local news, even if it wasn't always accurate. I gave a courteous grin. According to what I've heard, your nephew has returned with a buddy. Looking at my shopping cart, as though performing a visual inventory, she said. Yes, Ethan will be returning for the summer. He had a classmate with him. I answered in a steady tone. That individual, you mean Jordan? She curved her lips after emphasizing the name. He has been assisting you with watering the plants, I notice. Cut the grass. He's been quite kind lately. However, a little young, I hesitated for a moment. I'm not sure if it was the sarcasm in her voice or the fact that I knew I had exposed something inappropriate to others. I simply gave a small smile and pulled away. But like a stain that wouldn't go away, that sentence, a bit young, kept echoing in my ears. I was standing in the kitchen that afternoon, cleaning mugs. Ethan looked odd when he returned from somewhere. Without saying anything, he hurried in and held his phone out to me. There was a message in a local group on the screen. Something behind the wooden gate of friendship between generations. 23. Below was a grainy picture of Jordan and myself sitting on the chair on the back porch. We clasped hands. The yellow light caused our eyes to slant. It was like if a rock had been thrown at my chest. Chilly, astonished, out of breath. Mom Ethan spoke in a raspy voice. What's this about? I was unsure of how to react. I wasn't expecting this. It caught me off guard. I swallowed in an attempt to speak calmly. You see, Jordan and I had some time to chat. But not how you had assumed. What are you saying? His eyes remained confused, but his voice grew softer. I turned to face my daughter's boy, whom I had rocked to sleep on numerous occasions throughout his teething, who was now questioning me as though I were someone else. Someone to be wary of. Ethan, you did nothing wrong. However, others will believe you're mistaken. I gave a sour smile, because I'm too old to receive unconditional affection. Ethan remained silent. He sat down in his chair, his countenance glum, and turned away slightly. I approached. I touched him on the shoulder. Love isn't always as romantic as it seems. Furthermore, not everything is named. No one was lied to by you. Jordan wasn't pulled near by you. Ethan gave me a look. His eyes softened, yet they still had a hint of disappointment. I have faith in you. However, I'm not sure if I still trust Jordan. I gave a nod. You get it. Jordan knocked on my door that evening. His youthful, anxious face was illuminated by the yellow light as he stood in the doorway. I apologize that he dared not look at me. I said I don't blame you. I didn't want my actions to cause you any harm. I gave a weary smile. You didn't want me to suffer harm, which is why that we're in the most awkward situation. Jordan stepped forward. Ethan gives me an odd look. I told myself he needs time. Like unnamed shadows, we stood in the dark. I rested a hand on the doorframe and stared at Jordan for a while. I said, Do you regret it? Jordan gave a headshake. No. However, I fear that I will make her regret it. I didn't respond. That's what I said. Tomorrow is going to be rainy. Early bedtime is a good idea for you. And I slowly closed the door. My heart, however, remained open. And I realized, right once, that I was no longer the focus of this. After hearing the news, I slept for 2 nights straight. The home was unusually quiet, not because the noises had stopped, but rather because Ethan, Jordan, and I were making a conscious effort to speak less, as though each additional word would cause everything to fall apart into 100 fragments that would never be able to be reassembled. I didn't spend too much time staring at Jordan. It's not that I detested him. On the contrary, I feared looking at him would bring back that expression, the expression of someone who had never experienced soft, pure love. And I was aware that love also famished me. I noticed that I was beginning to retreat. Jordan knocked on my door one afternoon when Ethan was out for a walk. I anticipated his arrival. I could sense that something was coming to an end because of the gloomy, dark yellow light of the afternoon. He said, "Can we talk for a moment?" I invited him in with a nod. Jordan entered and took a seat on the small chair near the bookshelf. The child who had been listening to me a few weeks prior was no longer the same. His eyes, his shoulders, and his silence all showed signs of fatigue. He started, "I've been thinking a lot regarding what transpired, regarding her, about myself." I didn't interrupt. I gave him space to speak. To tell the truth, at first, I wasn't sure what I wanted. She was the first person who gave me the feeling that I could stay, and that was all I knew. I briefly closed my eyes. It felt like a gentle scratch. Then I began to crave more. Not cash, not assist. She was there. Her gaze, her tone. She touched my shoulder. I believed I was merely in need of consolation. Jordan went on. However, there were moments when I considered using it to remain for a while, depend on her. I turned and stared at him for a while. "Have you also—" Jordan gave a headshake. "No, I'm unable to. Due to— I don't want to be someone who causes her to doubt herself the closer we get." My eyes began to well up with tears. Not even a small smear at the corner caused them to collapse. I said in a pleasant voice, "Thank you for being honest. I believe I must also be honest." I poured 2 cups of tea and got up. I took a seat next to him and placed one in front of him. Not on the other side of him, not too far away, simply next to him. I believed I had complete control over anything I started, that I was old enough to understand my limitations. However, you helped me realize one thing. I was still at risk, wanting to be touched still, as if she had never lived her life to the fullest. Jordan gave me a non-interrupting gaze. "And that frightened me," I added. "I'm terrified of myself, not of you. I'm worried that if someone mentioned my name without passing judgment, I could go crazy." Jordan said, "You're not incorrect." Perhaps I grinned. However, society doesn't believe that. Additionally, I'm not sure if I'll be able to battle it again. We sat quietly. The tea was chilly. A sound that was seldom heard, the ticking of the clock, reached my ears. However, it struck me like a hammer to the heart today. Jordan finally said, "I'll go." I pivoted. "Don't hurry." He said, "I don't want to cut any deeper. One of us will be permanently harmed if this continues." I exhaled a quiet sigh of resignation. I said, "We've come too far to be strangers again." Jordan continued, "But not far enough to be anything." I gave a nod. I hesitated for a moment before putting my hand on the back of his. "For the final time, you entered my life unexpectedly, yet in such a way that I realized how I had been living all along." Jordan took my hand without being forceful or weak, only enough to keep things heated for a few seconds longer. She also inspired me to become a better man, to deserve that glance just once, not for her sake. I withdrew my hand, grinned. A melancholy grin reminiscent of the unanticipated autumn evenings. "Then remember me," I said. "Never?" he said. Jordan and I didn't say goodbye at the airport. He got it. I got it. Nothing needed to be confirmed by a last public hug. Our words were sufficient. Had had enough. I watched from the door as he dragged his little luggage past the lavender bed they had been tending to on the stone walkway. No assurances. No, I will return. Don't wait for me. A quick look over my shoulder, soft enough to let out a silent farewell. The gate shut behind him. Every morning, the round mark left by his teacup remained on the table's edge when I turned my hand back. The next few days went by in silence. A few weeks later, Ethan departed to do an internship in a different state. The house fell silent, like though I was afraid to speak. Barbara once went by to pretend to ask how I was doing while I was watering, and then she replied, half jokingly, "I heard that student left." "Yes, young folks, that is true. He is not yours to keep forever." I simply grinned. Not in a hostile way, but without explanation, as I am aware that not every relationship is meant to last. Some people enter our life via a summer window, like a breeze, warm up a little, then depart. However, the scent is still present. I'm not sure how you feel about sharing this story's conclusion with me. Perhaps you think it's incorrect. Perhaps it makes you sad. However, there may come a time when you pause and consider whether you have ever lived completely with your feelings. Then maybe we've really met in the things we dare not utter, not in actual life. I appreciate you listening to me through this entire process. Subscribe to the Daily Unexpected Stories channel if you want to keep hearing stories that are surprising but full of truth. We shall cross paths again with someone else, sometimes even with you in a different stage of life.